What's going on, guys? It's Danny from Slow Restoration. We're back to work on the 67 C10 here. We're gonna start the install of the Wilwood disc brakes, and to do this we do have to cut these mounting points off the factory spindle here. So we're gonna retain this bolt hole. This bolt hole we have to drill and retap them a 3/8 24. But the rest of this needs to go. So that's where the original caliper slid into, and that was the kind of caliper stays or stops. They need to leave. We got some light on the situation, so this goes on after we drill and tap those bolts. And this is the actual caliper mounting bracket. Get spun around here. So when you put this on, these bosses, the threaded boss, stick out towards the wheel. So this goes on, and of course it attaches to the back side here once we get rid of that stuff, but it will attach right here and right here with the new bolts they gave you. There's some shims and sleeves. We'll get to all that, of course, but as you can see here, if this is here, we don't have to worry about all that top. We need to get rid of the bulk of it and obviously make room for this bracket to go on from the back side, but it's not a good idea to cut all that out because it will weaken the spindle. But if we cut it, kind of come straight up and then cut the bulk of that off, it'll work just fine. So we'll use between this and this, we'll scribe some lines on there, use this as a template. With this roughly cut down so that fits on there. So you can see we have I took and just bolted both of our pieces together real quickly just so we can mock it up. And if we set it on there, we can get that to go on without any interference. We haven't cleaned this up yet. We'll take a grinder, sanding disc, polish all that up, get rid of the sharp edges, and just make it a little smoother. 332 thousandths drill bit, or it's a Q bit if you have a numbered drill bit. So we're gonna run the drill through this hole. This is a through hole, as you can see. We can run it through. This one is not a through hole, so we can just drill back until it hits the back, and it should be fine there. That's a blind hole. We could drill all the way through, but that's just going to weaken the casting a little bit more. I don't think it would be an issue, but I don't think it would be an issue without drilling through either. So then after we get that drilled, we'll take our, 3/8 24 tap. I already started this bottom one. We'll get that started. Make sure you get this started nice and straight. I started it, and then once we get back, there's where I stopped. So you just go nice and slow, kind of go back and forth. If you've never tapped anything, be careful. You can break the tap off, and that's a mess. Then you have to get the tap out. But you're just gonna pretty much, like I said, this one's a through bolt, so you can tap the whole way through. This one's a little bit trickier. Take some air, watch your eyes, wear eye protection, tap back until you hit that back wall, and just make sure your depth is good for that bolt engagement. Another thing worth mentioning too, this is cast, so obviously it cuts actually easy. If it's not cutting easy for you, you probably need to get a sharper blade or bit. I did use a combination of a Sawzall in spots and a Portaband bandsaw to make these cuts. Cut like butter. And again, tapping, drilling and tapping. If you're having issues drilling and or tapping, you probably have a dull bit and you don't want to use that. Go get you a new tap or a new drill bit, whatever works, but it should cut very easy. Once you get that drilled and tapped, you can run your bolt in. It should go all the way in smoothly. We're all the way into the taper and come out nice and smooth. So we got good thread engagement. We're sweeping up as we go here, but here is the ears I cut off. As you can see, the part you actually cut isn't all that thick. And like I said, it is cast iron. It cuts very nice. If it's not cutting nice, get yourself a new blade. And with all that done, again, we still have to clean up the sharp edges and polish it a little bit. But as you can see, we have both bolts in here. It's not tight, but we can see it's not hitting the actual spindle anymore. With these two bolt holes lining it up and locating this piece, it's freestanding there by itself. It's not hitting, it's not binding. And then we can put we have to adjust this. We have to put some shims in and adjust the caliper spacing, but that's what you're looking for. So we'll go ahead and get the other side cleaned up. And there's no sense, like I said, up here on top here, no sense cutting that whole web off because it's not in our way. So we can test fit our caliper and just confirm that, but I'm pretty sure we're gonna have plenty of clearance. All right, so we went ahead and test fit it, and as you can see, we have tons of clearance here, tons in the bottom. We probably could have left a little bit of that on there, but that right about here is where that C part started, so that looks good. The top looks good as well. We can radius that. So this is intimidating a little bit when you first think about actually cutting your spindle. It's a little bit intimidating, but don't worry, it goes nice, clean job. And once it's on there, it'll look professional. Wilwood knows what they're doing. Trust them. With that polished up a little bit and touched up with some black paint, we'll run to the other side here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Same thing, trimming this off. We know a little bit more of what we actually have to trim, but very easy to do. I already drilled and ran a tap through these two holes. We'll cut these ears off, clean it up, and we'll be ready to start assembling. And with the second side all cleaned up, polished up, cut down, cleaned up, polished up, and then touched up with some paint, we're going to go ahead and mount this bracket. Once we have that bolted on there, as you can see, there's room all around it. There's no interference anywhere. It's flat on these mounting tabs. These inserts, these thread inserts, go out towards the wheel. As you can see, there's a shoulder here, so it goes out. Now we're going to remove these two bolts. We'll put some Loctite on them, red Loctite, and we'll torque them down to 40 foot-pounds. And with Loctite on there, 40 foot-pounds. By the way, these are T45 Torx bits. Hold that on there. Ready to move on. For this next step, we're going to get our caliper actually mounting bracket situated up. So pretty much we have 4 of these bolts. We have these sleeves and we have a silver washer. Silver washer goes on first. A sleeve goes on. It goes through the bracket here. Let me grab it. All right, I think it's going to be easier if I set you up here. So we have our bracket, we have our bolt with our sleeve and our washer on there. This whole deal is going to go through. Watch, because that sleeve will fall right through. So we have both of these in there now. Positioned that way with the flat side. The bolt sticking through the flat side will hold our bolts here. Next, we have a spacer. The black spacer goes on each one. And then we have various, I'm going to set this down. So these are actually both in the same position now. Now we have different thickness washers. It comes with washer packs, and we have a set of calipers here so we can measure, but it's pretty much thin and skinny washers. If we measure it, this one it's calling it 16 thousandths. It's very close. So that's the thin one. See if I can grab a bigger one here. Nope, these are all small. So if I grab one from this pile, they are 30 thousandths. So we have 30 thousandths, and I think it says 16 thousandths. So initially they want you to put a 30 thousandths on each one of these and a 16 thousandths on each one of these. So now we will actually take this. These are both in the same position with the stacks of washers and shims. We'll take these and dry bolt these to the brackets that's already on the car. So this is the bracket that's already on the car, obviously. We'll take this, position that, and we'll start these bolts. Definitely easier with 2 hands here. We have that one started. keep all your shims in place. As you can see, the shim pack and spacer is in between there. And we'll go ahead and run these through. And that'll get us our initial spacing. What we're going to end up doing is shimming, putting shims in here or taking them out, and that will slide this bracket. You can see that's exaggerated, but this way, so the caliper is non-floating. We need to center over the rotor. So we'll get the rest of this done, get our rotor slid on, and then we can fine tune that. We'll say the directions say when you're drilling and tapping this hole and this hole for this bracket that you need to countersink it, but in this particular instance, the bracket in itself is countersunk for these bolts, so you don't have to countersink the spindle itself. Next, we're going to start prepping the spindles. So as you can see, we're going to put our studs in now. There is two bolt patterns. There's a 4.5 inch bolt circle and 4 3/4 bolt circle. Just match it up to what you're using. We'll put those in. They do want some red Loctite on these too, and torque to 77 foot-pounds. Obviously, you don't need Loctite on the whole thread, just right where it spins into the hub here. So we spun them in, dabbed a little Loctite on, and then we'll go ahead and torque them down. Run them the rest of the way in, torque them down. Alright, so we can also take and spin this Wilwood cap off. See if I can hold it there. So this just spins off, and there's an O-ring that keeps it locked on. Once we have that off, now we can go ahead and grease our bearings, pack our wheel bearings, and put the back one in, and then put the seal in. But I'll show you that in a second. I'll also show you a quick, easy way to torque these, because obviously this is kind of cumbersome, and 77 foot-pounds is quite a bit for holding with your hand. So we have one of our old wheels here. We just take the wheel with the studs, drop it in there. That's a quick way to make sure you got the right stud pattern on there too. So now we can take and actually just kind of kneel down on the tire here and go ahead and torque these to spec. After we have the studs installed, we got to get a little bit dirty. So a little bit greasy anyway. We need to pack these wheel bearings, and you can do it any way you feel comfortable. I have a wheel bearing packer, so we'll use that, but pretty much we're going to do these back ones, the bigger of the two bearings. The smaller of the two go on the outside. We'll pack them, put them down in there, and then we'll take a grease seal and push that down and lock that in. Definitely before you get too far, make sure this stuff is all right. We'll take the bearing and the seal and come over here. We'll check the bearing. Yep, it fits on there nice and snug. I already checked it. And the grease seal likewise goes on there nice and snug. Make sure your spindles are cleaned off thoroughly also, because we were grinding and cutting. Make sure there's no shavings. And then we are ready to assemble here. Slip it onto our spindle, and then we'll grease the outer bearing. You can put a little grease inside there if you like. Don't over grease it, but a little bit more won't hurt inside there. We'll grease the outer bearing, put it in there, and then go ahead and put our washer and nut on there and get this wheel bearing adjusted. With that installed in there, as you can see, we have everything greased nice. Hub is slid back in place. They do give you new flat washers here. They're a little bit smaller diameter, so we'll slide that on there. And you do have to reuse your original wheel bearing nut and cotter pin, and sometimes they actually have a retainer also. This one did not. It had a castle nut, but go ahead and adjust that to the factory spec, how you like to run your wheel bearings, and then we can screw our cap on. Once you have your wheel bearing adjusted, the nut on, the cotter pin through, make sure everything's neat. It's not poking through at too far. You don't want to gouge the inside of this cap. So we're actually just going to take our new Wilwood disc brake cap here, and we'll start it and we'll spin it on. It goes on nice and easy. You can spin it, make sure you don't hear any grinding, and then you just kind of snug it up on that O-ring, and that part's done. All right, we're getting somewhere now, guys. It's looking like something. We do have our rotors. This is a one-piece setup here. And when you slip them in, as you can see, there's small bolt holes. And it's kind of an offset bolt pattern. So make sure you select the right bolt circle that your spindle has, your wheels that you're running on the vehicle has, but also line up those 3 small ones. It may take a couple tries, but once you do have it, as you can see, all of these small ones line up. So we'll actually go ahead and take these small screws and run them in. They'll hold the rotor hat and rotor onto the spindle, nice and secure. They get tightened up to 85 inch-pound, not foot-pound, inch-pound. They're small bolts. And remember, there is a proper direction on these rotors. They are directional. As you can see, the arrow is pointing forward on that. All right, now to mount the actual calipers. And again, there's an arrow on them for direction right there around the 6th piston. And the reason that's important, if you look inside, there are actually different size pistons in there. And they want the bigger piston be towards where the rotor will come out as you're going forward. So initially, we're going to take some washers here. 35 thousandths washer, and we're going to slip them over top of the studs here. One there, and that's just the initial. We'll take, you lubricate your studs there, but then you'll take your caliper and slip down on there. With that slid on there, actually let me take a step back. So let's just pull this back off. We're going to look at this bracket here. I'm going to get some light so we can see. All right, there we go. We got some light. So I actually had this bracket on wrong. As you can see, the flat side is facing out, or actually in. So the recessed side goes in towards the rotor, out towards the rotor, however you want to say it. But the recessed side goes towards the other bracket that's already bolted on here. The flat side goes towards the center of the vehicle, away from the wheel. And what that does, that changes the offset here. So if we put this caliper back on, when I tried to do this, when it was the other way, it actually wouldn't go on. It was hitting, and the offsets were just wrong. I admit I did have to call Wilwood. It wasn't quite clear, at least to me, in the directions, and they were nice enough to get me straightened out, said, turn that bracket around. We did that, and now it fits the way it should. So again, don't be too proud. If you need help, Wilwood has good customer service. They will help you out. I did. They got me straightened out, so we're all good now. So let's continue on. We do need to center this caliper in the rotor. So over top of the rotor. So those shims that we had in there, we have a black shim and 2 small shims. We're going to measure this distance and this different distance. I can see it's a little bit shorter over here. So we need to take one of those shims, 1 or 2 of those shims out to move this caliper slightly this way. Yours is going to be different. I can't tell you how many shims to put in it because your setup will be different. Manufacturing tolerances on the factory spindle and stuff like that are going to change that. So once you get that centered up, it'll be time to drop the pads in, and we do need to actually shim the rotor this way too, in and out. Real quick though, before we get to that, once you have this shimmed and it's centered over the rotor, you can actually go ahead and remove these one at a time, put some Loctite on them, and torque them to 60 foot-pounds. That one and that one. Now we're ready to adjust, like I said, the shimming of the caliper in and out. So we're going to take this center pin out. It's a bolt, a nut, and a spacer. We'll get that out. We'll go ahead and take our brake pads, and of course the friction side goes towards the rotor, but we'll slip them down. And it's a little bit tight getting the pads in. Sometimes the pistons will be out a tiny bit. So once you get both pads in there, we're going to shim, like I said, the height of this up. We do have that 1 shim under, or 1 or 2 shims already under there. And as you can see, we're just the pad friction part is just ever so slightly above the rotor here. So we'll take this back apart. Again, I can't tell you how many shims to put in there. It's going to change. It's going to be left might be different from the right, vice versa. Each car is going to be slightly different, so you have to shim each one individually. You want pretty much to make this pad at the edge of the rotor when everything's snugged up. They do give you quite a few shims, different thicknesses to make that happen. Once you get that done, we do have we have washer and a nut that goes down here. You should already have these on. I don't right now, but you should have these on to properly set that, just so the caliper is on there straight. Once you have that, these get torqued to 23 foot-pounds on these. And then you also need to put this center bridge to hold your pads in. Again, the bolt goes through each side here, through the sleeve, and then the locking nut, and you tighten that up just so it tightens it up and snugs this spacer in between there. Don't over tighten it. There is no torque spec. You just don't want this sleeve to be rattling around inside here. Other than that, that is the complete installation of the Wilwood disc brakes. Of course, the brake kit does not come with a line, so you have to buy that line separate. It tells you right on this tag what it is. It's a 1/8 inch 27 MPT, and Wilwood does sell those line kits, but you can also buy them at like Summit, Jags, or any place like that. Maybe the supplier where you got your Wilwood brakes can also supply you with that. We don't have our line kit yet, but when you do and you hook these up, of course, you have to bleed the brakes, and you always want to use the top 2 bleeders. Don't open the bottom up, because that's going to allow air into it. You want fluid in, air out, so bleed the top 2 bleed screws. So it's a very nice looking kit. Fits very well when you assemble it correctly. And like I said, if you have any questions, Wilwood will definitely help you out. As I look back at the directions, that was my mistake. It doesn't actually state that in the directions which way that bracket goes on, but the picture does show it on correctly, and that's something I just overlooked. So they got me straightened out. We got the job done. And of course, these are big brakes. These are all but 13-inch rotor. It's a 12.88 rotor, and the caliper is pretty big too. It's a 6-piston, so a 15-inch wheel is not going to fit on here, and that's what was on this truck before. So we will have to get wheels. Keep that in mind as you're buying brakes. Your wheel selection is going to depend greatly. All right, guys, that's the Wilwood disc brake kit on the front of this, and that even though this is a 67 C10 we're working on, it does have that Firebird subframe. So really, this is a 2nd gen Camaro Firebird install. So we will be doing Wilwood rear disc brakes on this truck too. That's a lot to fit in this video, so we'll leave the front and we'll do the back in the next video. So if you're doing a rear install too, definitely check that out. Thanks for stopping by. Have a good day.